So we are shifting gears a little bit now, and we're going to do a fireside chat, and we are quite honored to have two individuals with us who are each leaders in their community, whether it's blockchain or authoring, and I'm going to introduce our moderator, Alison, first, a social scientist by training. Alison McCauley, as you can see up here, has advised executives on the adoption and the go-to-market for emerging technologies across industries, as diverse as we heard from what Alex was talking about, as healthcare, education, telecommunications, energy, retail, finance, hospitality, and manufacturing. I challenge you all to find something that she hasn't consulted someone on in her 20-year consulting career. She's a best-selling author of Unblocked, How Blockchains Will Change Your Business, and a contributor to Forbes, where she writes about the impact of emerging technologies on our world. As the CEO and founder of a consultancy called Unblocked Future, Alison's clients are entrepreneurs, established companies using emerging tech to shape the future. Please join me in welcoming Alison McCauley. So you've heard a lot of talk, maybe in the press or maybe here, on our next speaker. Our keynoter for the morning is co-founder and chairman and former CEO of Ripple, and he's a couple of surprises in store for us this morning. He's done a number of exceptional things, and I wanted to use this pictograph just to kind of highlight it a little bit. Is there anything special that you all from Denmark notice about this? Well, let me tell you that Chris started at a public university. He went to San Francisco State University, and then he went to Chevron, and he got his MBA from Stanford. But somewhere in there, he also went to Copenhagen University, and maybe he'll talk about that a little bit more. Right after getting his MBA, and while working, he worked in the mortgage business, and he met his new venture co-founder, Janina Pawlowski. They created Eloan. Chevron, Eloan, as you can see, one of the first online mortgage lending service providers in America. Eloan created the marketplace by removing the high cost from mortgage lending and disrupted the market for low-cost lending, including providing free credit scores. I think it was quite interesting when Alex was talking about what happens with blockchain and with cryptocurrency and how it removes the middleman. And obviously, this tendency started early when Chris was doing e-loans. Chris successfully navigated the company to an IPO and ultimate acquisition by Banco Popular. He's a serial entrepreneur. After Eloan, he went on to co-found Prosper, and just like Eloan, it was the first of its kind in the United States and eliminated the need for the proverbial middleman, with lenders and borrowers interacting directly on the platform. By 2008, the company was already starting to gain recognition, and Fast Company named Prospero Marketplace as one of the most innovative companies of the year. In 2012, our speaker stepped down as CEO and went on to found, again, OpenCoin, a company that began developing the Ripple payment protocol and then went on to be called Ripple Labs. Ripple was being designed to be a platform that would enable almost instantaneous transfers at minimal transaction fees. This is starting to sound like a trend. Ripple Payment Protocol, XRP, is the native digital currency of the Ripple network and has gone on to become one of the most valuable cryptocurrencies in terms of market capitalization. It remains one of the top 10 cryptocurrencies in the market. Ripple has enjoyed a great deal of support and adoption from banks and other financial institutions. It's always hard to deal with financial institutions, so I find that a huge deal. Majority consensus is that Ripple offers a better operating framework that is more in line with financial best practices than most of the other cryptocurrencies. He's been active for 20 years in the technology industry as an angel investor, a business executive with a portfolio of several successful enterprises, and he's currently, with Ripple, also a sponsor of the Satarja Center Blockchain Accelerator. Apart from his role as an executive, Chris is also an advisor, board member of a number of enterprises like Kifeng, which I may be pronouncing wrong, Bettable, and the Electronic Privacy Information Center. Please welcome Chris Larsen.
Wow, Chris, it's great to be here with you.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, that's such an incredible history, and I know that this audience, who is a very international audience, and is composed of executives across industries, and is entrepreneurs and executives who are looking to do innovative things within their companies, is going to be very interested in tapping into your perspective from starting not just one first of its kind company or two, but three, and obviously your perspective at the edge of innovation. But I think first on everyone's mind is, what do you miss most about living in Denmark?
I guess the flæskesteg, it's hard to get here, right? They don't sell it the right way. But yeah, that was a wonderful experience. It's great to see Danes in the audience. That was kind of a breakout experience as far as opening horizons, and it was a kind of a magical time, 81, 82, when the EU was kind of booming, and we got to go to Brussels and visit Poland when it was going through its turmoil. So it was fascinating. It was a great experience.
Fantastic. So there's a couple areas I'm hoping to take our conversation. So I'm hoping to start in hearing a little bit of lessons learned over the course of your career at the edge of disruption. And I'm hoping that you might share some stories with us of even the parts that didn't go so well, so we can learn from them. And then this is an incredible moment in time right now. We're at the dawn of a next era of disruption with blockchain technology. It's an area near and dear and of great fascination to me, and I know it's very important to you. And so I'm hoping that we all can get some insight from you on what you see as the opportunities, and get us thinking about some of the issues and the challenges that we should all be considering as we face this next era. And then I'm hoping to reserve about 30 minutes for Q&A. So I want to cover a lot of ground. Are you game?
Sounds good.
Excellent. So I think the first thing is, when you're looking at a new era of change or technology-driven disruption, it's really difficult as an executive or an entrepreneur to identify opportunity that really matters. It's really going to make a difference. And it was 1996 when you founded Eloan, which was a first-of-its-kind company pioneering online lending. Now, just to put that in perspective, it was 1997 when the domain google.com was registered. And the company was founded in 1998. So, Chris, that was extremely on the edge. And when you do that, there's no set path, there's no proven business models, there's no patterns necessarily to follow, and there's a whole lot of noise. There's an incredible amount of innovation and a whole lot of noise from good ideas, bad ideas, ideas that are before their time. And so the first question I really want to hone in on is, how do you zero in on where the real opportunity is among all that? Because you've done that successfully multiple times.
Yeah, I mean, it is really difficult, because I think if it's so obvious that something is kind of ready to be changed or disrupted, and I'll talk later, I hate the word disruption now. I've kind of reformed myself to move away from that. We can maybe get into that. I used to love that word. But if it's obvious that something needs to be kind of rewired, it's probably too late, right? So this is the big paradox about starting anything new. And so the hardest thing is talking to people you respect. I always think the key to starting a business is ignoring advice from people you respect, right? Because if those people are saying, oh yeah, that's a great idea, you should totally do it, it's too late, right? Because they've been telling their networks already, and there's probably already a ton of competitors, and you probably miss the boat. So anything you're going to do that's probably going to that has a chance of being successful, and a big part here, you just have to get lucky, right? A bunch of stuff has to fall in line, including we were just lucky to be here in the Bay Area. The Bay Area makes it way easier, and frankly, we can talk about this. If I was in Copenhagen doing this, way harder, and we can talk about why that is. Part of that's Danish culture. Part of that's infrastructure for starting businesses. So if you're in Denmark, you have a harder time. It's just harder. You have an easier time here. But so you got lucky, but you also had to sort of in your brain get a feeling for something that most people are going to probably reject, although hopefully not reject too in a too difficult way. And this is, again, another advantage to the Bay Area, because any stupid idea you come up with in the Bay Area, most of your friends are going to say, that is super cool. You should totally do that, right? Whereas in, New York or most parts of Europe, sorry, you guys, you're going to get smart people giving you 10 reasons why it's a dumb idea. And that's debilitating, right? That it's way easier to say to somebody, this is awesome, dude. You should totally do that. It helps, right? But I think the magic, if there's any magic, again, you have to really get lucky, but is looking at lots of things. So I think any entrepreneur can't just be too heads down into the one domain that you're in, but you sort of have to try to connect dots. I think all the good stuff happens from dots being connected. I think in the case of Eloan, the first one, we modeled it after looking at Charles Schwab, which had successfully created this discount, kind of brokerage operation way before the internet, and he was criticized heavily before he started. He hung in there, and obviously that was a trend that just took off. So even before the internet started, because Eloan kind of developed before the internet, but we were trying to use sort of database technologies to build a Charles Schwab of lending. That was kind of the idea. And then kind of keeping our eyes open, and around 96, so Eloan was started in 97. It was kind of a predecessor company before that, but 97 is really when it took off, was E-Trade. And I think I might have had a different name way back then, but it was a kind of an more extreme version of Charles Schwab. They were doing everything on the phone to make super low costs. And it's when they went online that kind of changed everything. So it was kind of having an idea with Charles Schwab, keeping an eye on these models evolving, seeing E-Trade move to online. That kind of opened the floodgates for VC, venture capital, backing financial plays. Before that, they wouldn't touch it. The thought back then was, yeah, the internet's kind of fun, but no one in their right mind's ever going to put financial data on the internet. Of course, we know that that changed radically. But it wasn't until 97 when there was kind of a movement that unlocked capital to flow in, and then things that just happened really quickly. So it was kind of you keeping your eyes out, trying to connect this thing with that thing, and then having a feeling in your gut, which then you have to just have that fact, Stockdale paradox, right? Facts and faith, right? So face the brutal facts, but always have faith that it's going to work out. The faith is what I think gets you through it, and again, that's on the face of all these experts that are probably recommending don't do that. It's never going to work. It would have been done already. The big guys are going to kill you, and being able to ignore that, to take it in, ignore most of it. Maybe there's a nugget that you can adjust your model, and you should. That's the tricky part, ignoring most of it, but not being so crazy that you ignore good advice.
Yeah, and I have so many questions off of this, and I want to dive into several things you were just saying. So a while ago, I was talking to the CEO of a very successful early internet retailer. It was bluefly.com, and that was, I think it was in the late 90s. I bought all my clothes on that. And he was talking about, and he's continues to stay involved with new technologies, and he said, back then, in 1994, we couldn't imagine where things would go. We just didn't have the mindset. We couldn't wrap our heads around it because we could not, with our experience at that point, imagine Uber or Snapchat and or Facebook. We didn't even know, we couldn't visualize it. And also another thing that happens is it's the mashup. You talked about connecting dots. It's the mashup of technologies where a lot of the really cool stuff comes out. So when you weave in, say now AI and IoT and blockchain, that's where maybe a lot of the magic happens. So my question for you on that, and also with what you just said, is how much of this is trying to forecast versus staying agile and paying attention to what's happening and being responsive? Like, how do you manage that, especially in light of what you said, where it's trusting your gut?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a little bit of both. I mean, you're definitely bouncing stuff off of friends, not necessarily experts, but friends, and kind of running things over and over again, particularly on the retail side. Maybe on the enterprise side, it's a little bit different. But you're looking at smart people that are forecasting things. I mean, people write all kinds of fascinating books and studies and analysis about where the future is going. So try to read as many of those as you can, but try to then critically go, this is just BS, and just throw it away the second you know it's BS. Just get it out of there I'll try to be a little kind to the last presentation, but there's a lot of propaganda in there, right? So try to get through it quickly and then try to move on. And try to move on to, try to move on to things that resonate with you. You can tell when you read something about the future and it resonates with you. That's usually important, trust your gut on that stuff. And then try to build that in, maybe try to write about it a little bit. I did a lot of writing before these. When you first start a business, you're doing a lot of internal, running it in your brain and trying to talk yourself into this position or that position. That's where the forecasts can be helpful. Again, throw away the garbage and throw away the stuff that's not helpful. Take in the stuff that is, then test it maybe with people you trust, who you can explain it to, who are not necessarily experts, that have to maintain their reputation. But try to get that story in your head that now you don't start until you have that story really perfected in a way that you can reach the hearts of really smart people. And then you're in your recruiting drive, which is recruiting for talent, money, regulators, press. And it's not just say oh, that's my story or my pitch, it's too cynical. It's you're touching their hearts. How do you get that down? And that's what's going to win, because really great things happen when people's hearts are in it. And you have to get to that point.
So I've worked with so many founding teams, and I see again and again that there is a struggle to understand when you have product market fit, because you don't want to overspend until you've got it right. So you've talked about this strong internal compass in order to understand, are you onto something? But how do you know if you truly have that product market fit?
So I actually
when you're wrong, how do you know when you've got it wrong?
I actually think product market fit happens a little bit later. So in all the examples that I've been a part of, the first part is kind of more of a vision of, it's way after product market fit, crossing the chasm, you sort of won, you got it all, complete, you conquered the world. It's really rests on that. And enough evidence and enough passion, leap of faith. Again, you got all those brutal facts. You can't really you don't even know what's in store, for it. Maybe if you knew, you'd never do it. But you're leaping towards this kind of end state future. And people who join startups, they kind of want that anyway. The people you hire later, maybe you need to have the product market fit and the evidence and the data for sure. But the early group, whether they're funders, team members, press, it's enough just to have a reasonable kind of vision about where things might go. And everybody kind of accepts that it's likely it's not going to work. That's kind of part of the excitement, right? To be able to say to your team, what we're doing is impossible, and that's why it's going to work, is really, that feels really good, right? So if you can do that and you mean it, and everybody can see you mean it, that's what startups are all about. That's startup magic. But that's kind of way before product market fit. I think that happens along the way. There's a little bit of a stumbling in the dark. We call it kind of crossing the desert, and you have just a little bit of water, and you better, don't go in circles in the desert. And I think when you get product market fit, you're past the desert, and then you're kind of just off to the races. But I think that's later.
So time and time again, you have gotten this right. And it looks from the outside as though you've had smooth sailing, but I know from working with so many different companies that it's never a smooth journey. So as you transition from, hey, we have our idea, our impossible idea, and we're ready to build and really execute on this, what are some of the things that you've gotten wrong along the way? And could you share some stories with us so we can learn from that?
Yeah, it's never a straight line. There's a lot of bad stuff that happens, just a lot of incredible stress, especially that first go round. But kind of some probably lessons learned. There's a lot of stuff you can't control, right? So with Prosper, for example, it was right. First 2 years were great, and then you hit the credit crisis, and then you had this huge regulatory backlash, and then it was 2 years of great, 6 years of misery and pain, and that was not a good experience. Plus, I think the second, if you've had a first successful company, you start the second one, you're actually a little bit lazier. So a mistake there was probably should have taken off a year regrouped and re-energized. I started that company literally the next day from stepping down from the first company. And I didn't realize I was I was a little bit less scrappy because we had money, and I was probably a little tired, and I was lazy on that, so I shouldn't have done that. And I also then didn't bring in a replacement for myself soon enough. I think kind of the skill set, some people like Elon Musk, amazing, incredible person. He can go all the way. Bezos, he can go all the way. I think few people can do that. So the skill set to sell the impossible dream in the early days, that's all about kind of reality suspension. And it really is I don't know what it is, but it is reaching enough people's hearts that you get their minds to join you. That's very different from, I think, once you get product market fit, that's discipline, it's measurement, it's reviews, and that's a different type of person. And so I didn't do that at Prosper. I waited too long, and then we got into, kind of a bad situation. And then once you're there, it's impossible to recruit the best and the brightest. You missed your mark. So lesson learned at Ripple, brought in Brad Garlinghouse, our amazing CEO, at I think the right time, and at a time when we could just get somebody like that. I always think these things are like jumping from one lily pad to the next. You have these big jumps, and once you get to that jump, you're now ready to do other things, like now recruit somebody to replace you. So big lesson learned, don't wait too long on that one. Because I get bored with that. I'm totally bored with reviews and staff meetings, and I just don't do that well. There's a point when that doesn't matter at all. It's a small group. You haven't found, you're stumbling through the dark. That's kind of building phase, building the team. But once you get that product market fit, if you don't have those disciplines, you're toast. So that was definitely a big learning.
Now tell me, you've talked a couple times about hearts and minds. What do you think entrepreneurs are underestimating in being able to win hearts and minds? What's the secret to it? I see a lot of, especially here in Silicon Valley, I see a lot of entrepreneurs that are enraptured by their technology, but not necessarily connecting it to hearts and minds. So what should entrepreneurs be doing differently?
Yeah, it's a great point. Yeah, there's a lot of, just falling in love with the technology like it's just going to magically happen. Things don't magically happen. So, you've got to be in there. So you got a big lesson, I think, also on the second one, Prosper. And it was kind of the sign of the times after the first .com crash. It was thought that the models that were going to be successful were the hands-off models, like Craigslist, eBay. It's a marketplace. Let the market run, total libertarian, just back off. I think that's a mistake. You got to get in there. These things are like children. You've got to be paying attention like every step of the way. But I think the hearts and minds question, I think, is it's got to be genuine. You've got to be much more of a giver than a taker. I think there are some incredibly successful takers. I won't say any names, but there are definitely personalities like that. If you're really incredibly good enough, you can get away with that. That kind of imperial CEO, kind of you're here to worship me kind of thing. I think, though, that's the exception. I think you have to be like a parent in a way. You got to be really generous, not just with resources, but with feeling, heart, kind of cutting people slack. You can't ever show weakness. Boards and teams are not your friends. It's this weird thing. Again, it's like that parent versus friend thing. You love your team, but they're not your friends. The minute you start thinking they're your friends, and Silicon Valley gets into this problem all the time, where small group working together nonstop, and it's kind of like a family, isn't it? Until things start getting difficult, and of course it's not a family at all, right? And then people feel betrayed. So set those boundaries from the get-go. You can love your team, but still, have the talk that, hey, it's time for you to leave. This is not working, right? It's a tricky balance, but I think that's how you have to set it.
Yeah. Okay, now I want to hear what's wrong with disruption.
What's wrong with disruption? Is a bad thing, right? That's it's like blowing up stuff. I know it's meant in this sort of adolescent way in Silicon Valley, I think, because 20 years ago, like tech was mostly kind of young males, I guess, and tech wasn't really all that important in the world. It was kind of oh, that's the tech industry, and there's all these other industries. Now it's everywhere. So the idea that we're talking about disruption, like that's somehow good, one, incredibly arrogant. It sets a tone of everything else besides what we're doing is somehow bad or rotten or evil. At a very time when actually tech is looking increasingly bad, rotten, and evil. So it's just a bad message, even if Silicon Valley was in a pretty good, kind of place as far as reputation. In this current environment where the techlash is on full, where basically 8 people on Earth control like all the platforms, it's a terrible word, right? So we've really done a lot of work on rejecting that. I mean, I used to do that disruption talk like night and day at Prospero and at Eloan. And part of it is we're a consumer brand. You're kind of going up against the evil lenders and the evil banks. I get it, all that stuff. A lot of the nonsense you hear now with blockchain, it's just so adolescent. It's from people that have no experience about how the real world works. And it's a fantasy about, that their technology is going to solve everything. The world computer, give me a frickin' break. Anyway, okay, I won't get too in that, but okay. But I think we have to think of ourselves as builders. So not disruptor, you're builders, not disruptors. Building is good. Like the world needs, we need to be constructing things. We need to be building things. That's not offensive. That's more neutral, right? Disruption is a political statement. A political statement in a world of great diversity, you're not including so many people in that kind of discussion. So I think it's a toxic idea. It's everything that's wrong with Silicon Valley. We need to bury that word forever.
So let's now take that idea around focusing on building and apply it to this particular moment in time, which is a very exciting moment in time where we have this new technology, among others, blockchain technology. And you've referred to this as a Cambrian explosion, a time of Cambrian explosion. And that term is referring to a period about 500 million years ago, approximately, where there was a spectacular explosion, proliferation of new species, and most of our major animal groups are, from today, can be traced back to the fossil record during that relatively short geological period. And so it's a time, and we saw this in the early days of the World Wide Web. So 30 years ago, there was, it felt like, a Cambrian explosion of innovation, and then eventually a few species or types, I guess, willowed down and won out. And we were left with these new categories, these new possibles that came out of that. So I'm curious, in the setting of today, you're just looking out, why do you see blockchain as a potential Cambrian explosion? And what do you think, if so, the explosion will be like?
Yeah, so and blockchain itself is kind of a little bit of a misnomer, right? It kind of technically describes Bitcoin proof of work methods. It also describes just a distributed ledger. We think of it being a little broader than that. It started with blockchain. It's also derivatives of blockchains, so things like interoperability protocols, which are, we think, as important, the things that will wire together all of the ledgers of the world. A blockchain can't do that because it's a network. So a network can't be a network of networks. So you need something else, more like IP, that will be the network of networks. But those two things together, we think,
so we could say that we're talking more broadly about this category,
right,
of which blockchain is a part. And if you have a good umbrella term, please let me know.
Yeah, we kind of use internet of value. We like that because we do think it's like a second internet. We've had an internet of data, and and we had this Cambrian explosion. Once the internet of data infrastructure was put in place, remember, early 90s, it was kind of too early for a consumer. Like, broadcast.com guy got really lucky, sold really early, and amazing guy. But it was probably too early for that actual model, and I think it got absorbed and shut down, right? If you'd started that maybe 5 to 10 years later, it would have been maybe YouTube, right? Yeah. Who knows, right? But the key point there is you needed enough infrastructure, that ISPs and everything else that came with it, before the Cambrian explosion of those applications could come on the stage. We think that's the same thing we have today with blockchain. We're putting the infrastructure of that Internet of Value in place, which is why we think this is really an enterprise play at this point, and the consumer applications of today are like the broadcast.coms of yesterday. It's too early, generally. Maybe some will make it, but it's too early because there's not enough that infrastructure has been put in place. So that infrastructure, you could certainly just create a new, or try to create new rails from the get-go, but I think in finance that is a losing proposition, because finance is different than data in that 3 domains are coming together. The data one was mostly coding and tech. The value one is equal parts tech, capital markets, and compliance. Very, very difficult, conflicting domains that have to come together. So we think the fastest route to that is grabbing onto what really is changing with this sort of blockchain, Internet of Value movement, and then working with existing enterprise to not replace the entire stack. Most of that stack is just fine. You don't need a world computer. You don't need to blow up the banks or the central banks. Nonsense. Just replace the parts that are not working. One of the parts that is fundamentally not working in an Internet of Value is that lack of interoperability between networks and countries. And again, ask ourselves, why does it take, send somebody to Denmark from Berkeley? If it gets there in 3 days, you're lucky, right? You'd be faster sticking it in a FedEx envelope and sending it to Denmark, right? So that's unacceptable in 2019, that it costs so much money to send value cross-border, it takes so long, the failure rates through SWIFT and correspondent banking are so high, the lack of access to 2 billion people in the world, right? Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, I know you guys know each other very well. They would say those 2 billion people need to be sending 50 cents cross-border to be fully engaged in the global economy. You can't do that profitably through a bank. Even though the bank wanted to do it, you can't do it, right? It just doesn't work with the antiquated systems we have today. So we need to get to a world where that does work, where it's profitable for a bank or a new fintech, hence then a Cambrian explosion, I think, does happen once you lay the groundwork for being able to send value instantly, so we can get, any small amount, let's say a thousandth or a millionth of a kroner, you could get that to Denmark in seconds with no failure rate, so it's atomic and with certainty of finality and settlement, and in a way that's open to everybody, so it's not a bilateral series of bilaterals. The internet is started 50 years ago today, by the way. Today's the 50th anniversary of the internet. The internet was created once you got away from a bilateral series of agreements and communications, right? The moment you had 3 players, no longer bilateral, that's the birth of the internet. And then you get these multi-hops and multi-nodes. And that's exactly what we need with finance. And today it's all a bunch of bilaterals. So where we think the really important thing is right now, work with enterprise, which is mostly banks, financial players, remittance companies, anybody moving value around the world, and help them with their interoperability cross-border, cross-network, so that M-Pesa can interoperate with PayPal and HSBC and Bank of China and any bank in the world or any payment provider in the world, and then let any entrepreneur get to any market. The problem in the developing world is most of the people that live there, they are trapped by maybe a single bank or maybe 3 banks and a single cell carrier for mobile payments, and they're paying crazy amounts for the privilege of sending value through those systems. You need a system where anybody can get to Kenya or Tanzania and compete as a fintech, and that's really gonna change everything. And that's that Cambrian explosion that I absolutely believe will happen, and we're well on our way to getting that Internet of Value. But that sort of has to happen first before any of the other stuff is mostly viable, with some other exceptions, which I can go into as well.
Yeah, so you've talked about, a key tenet of this will be, blockchain, a broad definition of blockchain-enabled future will be interoperability. You've talked before about an analogy with a shipping container. where it used to be that a third of the cost of shipping a good was attributed to just unloading and loading the ship, because there'd be pallets and boxes and sacks that arrive and at the dock, and it needed to be loaded in like puzzle pieces. And then a shipping container came along in 1956 and made it interoperable. So you talked about banks, but I'm hoping you could bring to life a little bit more about how the idea of interoperability could extend to other areas and other industries, and how is that going to change us?
So what we think of, so I think the shipping container, we love shipping containers. I think that's just a great visual in the back of our head. So always think about, is blockchain the shipping container for money? I think it's a good way of thinking about things. I think it inspires people. But this is what we think, that Internet of Value is the final step in globalization. So if you think about, globalization's not really working today. In fact, it's probably in its worst state. And the reason for that is because you have two of the three components are in place. You have data, so data is completely interoperable anywhere on Earth. Great, that all works. Totally changed everything. Shipping container, it created interoperability with goods. It costs like 4 cents to send a shirt clear across the world, 4 cents, right? Way less than sending money around the world, almost in line with data. So you have that interoperability. The shipping container, it's a standard. To your point, before the shipping container, goods would be sent from one port, they'd arrive at another port. It was, very labor-intensive, situation going on. Things that had to be unpacked, repacked. That was really holding back the world. And after the shipping container, 700% increase in global trade. Every port, every ship, and Danes know this more than anybody. You guys have an amazing shipping infrastructure. But every port, every train, truck, warehouse is interoperable. That's pretty awesome. But the part that's missing is the money part. So our belief is that once you get the money part, so that, again, that person who wants to send 50 cents cross-border can now be a full economic actor. Now you've completed the picture. You still have this grand, network of networks, a network of data, goods, and money. And that's why we think this is so important. We really think this is holding back the world. Because if you think of that 2 billion people in the developing world, worst situation possible. Suddenly, they, on their phone, see how the world can be. So everybody's kind of excited, except they can't execute on it. They can send the shirt they made, no problem, but they can't engage in the financial system, in the payment system. That's frustrating. So I think, again, that's why the blowback on globalization. So that's really what we hope happens. And once payments, and it's not just really payments anymore, it's the movement of value of any kind. So that could be, shields and swords from games that are interoperable to any other game, and therefore they just exist as assets or value that you can invest in and just exist in the world. All kinds of things you can't imagine. Cars and devices, your car paying the car in front of you, a thousandth of a kroner to move over. Things like that, right? And applications. So applications, devices probably are the, machine-to-machine payments are probably bigger than person-to-person payments, right? And that's when you really get that explosion.
So when everything has a wallet, a point in space, or a car, or a drone, everything can have a wallet. And there's this portability that comes from interoperability, so you can move things in and outside of silos. You have this whole new world that's enabled. This is a very vibrant picture, and I'm curious, with the explosion of, with the potential of all this development with digital assets, now it's rendered in code, so that creates all kinds of new functionality, all kinds of innovation around it. How should regulators look at this? You wrote an open letter to Congress, and in it, the first sentence was, "Please do not paint us with a broad brush." And I'm curious, how should this be painted? Help us understand, help educate us on the nuance of how we should think of this new world of digital assets and digital value.
Yeah, and that campaign recently was in response to Facebook's Libra project. And we like a lot of the people there. So David Marcus, an amazing guy, for example. But it created so much blowback that it actually changed the regulatory conversation in a pretty meaningful way, which is unfortunate because I kind of felt like the entire industry was finally kind of post to the ICO, initial coin offering, a lot of scams, and then we had that 2 years ago. That created a lot of regulatory kind of, oh my God, we got to get up here and tamp this down. I think we were just coming out of that. So the Facebook thing was fascinating. It was an enormous company embracing cryptocurrency. That's good, right? That kind of woke everybody up. We got a ton of new customers that week. But it alarmed all the regulators, particularly in Europe and the US. And so what we were trying to do is try to say, look, don't put us all in the same category. Because what Facebook's trying to do is really a retail play that could be pretty disruptive to central banks. Whereas what we're trying to do, we're trying to work with the existing system and just replace one component that we think is not working, and then see what comes out from that. But I think the big thing that regulators need, and this is particularly in the US, actually regulation is much better in Asia, particularly in Southeast Asia, Japan. Europe is actually pretty good. Latin America now has gotten pretty good, particularly in Brazil. It's pretty clear in Mexico, for example. But the U.S., which has an outsized weight on the global financial systems, 3% of the world, but it's about 60% of kind of money flows. It's still not clear. So we've got to the argument we make is we've got to get to a point, much like you saw during the Clinton administration in '97. There was a magic moment when they created the framework for global e-commerce. And it was a magic moment because at that point in '97, there was a lot of talk about this internet thing is just, totally crazy, bad stuff going on. We need to stop this stuff, right? It's not unlike some of the discussions you've had in cryptocurrency, over the last couple of years. And he came up with, saying, nope, look, we've got to come up with a consistent, simple, reliable, predictable model across all of our regulators, minimalistic, that encourages this, because this is a net good thing. And everything changed from then. And I think that's why you had tremendous leadership, in the US around the internet industry. So we need that again. Now it's trickier in finance just because I think with data, a lot of countries have kind of a pretty, freedom of expression view of it. You don't really have that in money. You don't have the rights to move value in money like you do speech, for example. So it's a trickier beast to solve. But I think right off the bat, though, we've got to get clarity from the SEC in particular. What things are you going to look at as securities? What things are you going to look at as non-securities? Get a clear distinction between those. You'd still ultimately like to see the digital assets in the CFTC, I believe, in the commodities regulator area. That's kind of cleaner. And some movement there recently. The new commissioner is, I think, really forward thinking on this. U.S. generally, it's a good regulatory environment for fintech. The Trump administration has generally been pretty hands-off and pro-innovation. That's the good news. But the U.S. regulatory, system is very complicated. Every state, there's like 4 or 5 different federal regulators. It's very complicated. This is where places like Singapore, Tokyo, London have a huge advantage. I'd like to say Copenhagen, sorry guys, but not quite there yet. But you have the advantage where in those capitals, the regulators, the capital markets, the innovators, all in one city. That's actually pretty good. So I guess you could do that in Copenhagen, sure. But is anybody from Copenhagen, or are you guys from a different city? So nobody even reacts to my, Copenhagen insults. Okay.
Aren't there like 5 or 6 cities actually from Copenhagen?
Okay, there they are. Okay, all right. I love Copenhagen, sorry.
Well, I want to ask one last question before we open it up to everyone else for their questions. So looking out at opportunity right now in the next few years, what kind of advice would you give to entrepreneurs or executives that are looking to really leverage this new technology to do something new? What's the most important thing they could be thinking about?
Well, most important thing, I think everybody here is pretty young, so cut the lifeboats. I mean, start companies. It doesn't. If you fail, who cares? This is not like going to war. It would be a good experience anyway. Most people that back startups, if you fail once, as long as you weren't completely crazy or irresponsible, they're going to want to back you the second time, right? So cut the lifeboats. Our risk profiles are like zero. They really are. And we're in a period of incredible change. So just a ton of opportunity. And so many domains are changing simultaneously. Again, the magic of connecting this with that has never been greater. There's never been more investors that want to back startups. So I think that's kind of a broad thing. Within blockchain, though, obviously we think cross-border. Obviously, we think everything starts there. So that's a big category, and that's moving now. Like 200 financial companies now have integrated, just our applications, and there's just a ton of opportunity to do other things. Web monetization, companies like Coil, real big fans of that. Web monetization is basically using blockchain tech and derivatives of tech to pay content creators in tiny amounts. So packets of information are going this way and packets of value are going that way. Fundamentally different than kind of the workaround that we have today, which is the ad networks. That's a workaround for payments, basically. And that we have to get rid of that because that's everything that's gone wrong with the internet. So it's kind of, web monetization is more efficient, it's better for content creators, and it gets back to a more democratic version of the internet that we all envision, getting away from the big eight that control everything. And then gaming, I think. Yeah. Gaming in that, which has hundreds of millions of users today, that people have invested incredible amounts of money in these game platforms to buy assets, but those assets are stuck in the game. So blockchain-like technologies could free up those assets and they could just exist as things in the world. And that's pretty cool.
Fantastic. All right, I want to open this up to questions. Yes.
Can I ask you all to actually use the microphone and say where you're from? If you don't mind. Do you still have a question?
Hi, Yoav Benin from the Bay Area. And at the beginning of the talk, you spoke a little bit about the thesis and origin of Eloan. I was curious to hear that kind of story, what it was behind Prospero and Ripple. And then did Ripple do any ICO financing? So two-part question.
Thank you. So Prospero was actually, the inspiration for that was a Vietnamese system of lending. So my wife is Cambodian and Vietnamese, and they have a system there called Hui. And it's kind of a common system you have in developing worlds where maybe you get 12 people together, everybody chips in some money, and then one of those people every month gets like a loan. And then there's an imputed interest rate in it. The magic there is like there's so much peer pressure that default rates go down a lot relative to your credit standing. So the idea behind that was, could we recreate that group kind of credit pressure, but in a big liquid market like Wall Street? That was kind of the original vision. And I think it did work. Some of the regulation, though, kind of squeezed out some of those advantages around social information, unfortunately. So I think at this point, peer-to-peer has not been successful because all that magic has been squeezed out. I think there's room to create another peer-to-peer 2.0. In China, it also kind of took off, and then I think, got into a bad place. So there's definitely room for someone to start a peer-to-peer 2.0. Ripple, the idea there, I think, was just kind of keeping an eye on digital cryptocurrency, not before cryptocurrencies, digital assets. So even before Bitcoin, there was something called Linden Dollars and Second Life, Phil Rossdale's company, amazing guy. That was fascinating. There was community currencies like Vermont dollars to kind of support communities in a kind of a closed ecosystem. Germany had a bunch of these small currencies that were experimenting. So there was a lot of experiments. I think when Bitcoin came along, though, that was like obviously a game changer because it solved the double spend problem without having to rely on a central authority. We thought we could build a better Bitcoin that didn't waste so much energy. It just, in our mind, our Bay Area is burning here. We don't have any electricity. This is a climate change problem. It seems unacceptable that the young generation is going to tolerate a global payment system that burns as much electricity as a small country and would be a big country if it really took off as the global system. So I think either they have to change their method or you need a different system. We never did an ICO. We started that company in 2012. The company was gifted the initial digital assets created by the founders, of which I was one of them. So it was like a really different approach.
Yes, in the back.
Yeah, your name sounded very familiar, and then I remembered you were an early investor into Credit Karma, where I was an early employee. Can you talk about your investment philosophy?
Sure, yeah. So Credit Karma, an awesome company, and the guy behind it, Ken Lin, so he was actually one of our early employees at Eloan. He was working on our SEO strategy, our search engine optimization. Super smart guy and big heart. So talk about a guy who was able to kind of talk to people's hearts with a mission and then recruit a great team. And it's just an incredible company. He's just kind of built it up slowly, took his time, always focused on the right thing, giving free credit scores to consumers in a transparent way. And, it's been an incredibly successful company. It's worth billions. It makes a ton of cash. I think they'll probably go public. So it has been an honor to be part of that. He's just a great guy. But generally with investments now, I generally not investing in fintech just because I'm kind of bored with it, frankly. And I got enough interest in it. I like the stuff that's trying to work on climate change is really, really fun, and water scarcity, like these solar-powered desalination plants I'm really big on right now. This is really cool. And some of the things they're trying to genetically modify plants to grow bigger roots to absorb more CO2. Those look like a winner. So things like that.
So it's probably a very basic question, but with Ripple and with Libra and with Bitcoin and whatnot, digital currencies, what is the fundamental difference between them? How should we distinguish between the digital currencies? It's not like the national currency, which has the local aspect. How do we distinguish between global digital currencies?
Yeah, I guess stepping way back, I'm kind of the view of these digital currencies will supplement the global economy. None of them are going to replace fiat currencies. It's too much of an interest. Every country needs its own currency for all kinds of good economic reasons, including being inflationary generally, and paying taxes. So I think of these things in terms of kind of like being the Singapore dollar or the Swiss franc of the world. That would be end state incredibly successful and would be constructive for the world. So they just help lubricate the movement of other things of value, whether they be fiat or they be gaming assets or, stock, anything, right? So they are supplemental, they don't replace. Within, how to categorize them, Libra is obviously a stable coin. Generally, I'm not super excited about stable coins. I kind of don't get it. Why? Why not just use a fiat then? If it's just going to be backed by fiat, and then you got the counterparty who has to maintain it. I just don't get it. I think it's a trend. Anyway, you don't have to worry about volatility that much to use a lot of digital assets. So for example, in cross-border payments, a bank that's using a digital asset to lower how much liquidity they need in the system, and that's a big part of what they solve, right? There's trillions of dollars in liquidity tied up just because payments take so long. It's really hard to settle them in fiat. A really efficient digital asset's just way more efficient. And then a bank, instead of having to use a correspondent or having to have money, a Danish bank would have to have money in every market they serve. Using digital assets, they only have to hold kroner. They don't even have to own the digital asset. They're just going to get it on demand from an exchange. If it's a fast enough digital asset, XRP is 3 seconds to settle. You're out of it in 3 seconds. That's actually lower volatility than the US dollar that takes days to settle. So stablecoins, what they're trying to create isn't really a problem that needs solving. I'd put a big separation on the proof of work coins, because I just think, again, with climate change, those are kind of unacceptable methods when you have to chew that kind of electricity up just to confirm a transaction, which you don't have to do. You could do it in other ways, like XRP Ledger does it in a consensus model. It just doesn't use meaningful amounts of electricity. So I think maybe people use that as store of value, I guess, but you just don't have to do it that way. So I would kind of divide it up into those three, roughly.
Thank you.
Hey, Jacob from Denmark. A question concerning innovation mentality. What you have earlier been living in the Copenhagen area and are working globally. What do you think is the main difference between Denmark, Europe, and the Bay Area in concerning innovation mentality? And if there is a difference, how could we approve? I guess there's a difference.
That's a good question. Well, one of the things in the Bay Area now, Bay Area, in my opinion, okay, I'm from here, so I'm biased, but it's getting more powerful, right? So people talk about something, Silicon Valley, it's, you know, it's going to fade and all that kind of nonsense. It's just marching ahead because you're getting thicker and thicker groups of every possible technology expert you could imagine, and people who can do business development and raise money and all that. It's just a really thick ecosystem, so it's really easy to recruit. And that's just getting stronger and stronger. Most of the VCs would tell you the same thing. If they're out of the Bay Area for 6 months, they feel like they've missed something, right? So you're coming at it from a disadvantage. It doesn't mean it's impossible to create, but like the track record of trying to create another Silicon Valley over the world is pretty unsuccessful. But that said, Denmark has this amazing education background, has everybody there is a globalist, you know, in the best sense of the word. They understand, you know, you have to be interoperable to the rest of the world. That's not natural to the Bay Area necessarily. But there's a couple of things that are tough in Europe generally. One, employees don't want to take stock options like they do here. Like employees here will take a big leap of faith, won't even take any salary sometimes in the beginning, take a big chunk of equity. I don't know if it's the employees that are resistant or sometimes the entrepreneurs. I've met, you know, I've backed some entrepreneurs in Europe, and it's like, yeah, we're not giving any stock options. Like what? Like it's weird that way, and they're paying salaries. I think that's a problem, and maybe it's taxes as well, but I think it's culturally, it's just not as common. There is that big thing of, you know, if you're in Denmark and somebody comes to you with an idea, just no matter what it is, no matter how stupid it is, say that is the greatest freaking thing I've ever heard. You should totally do that, right? I think you actually need to break that cycle of, you know, Danes can be like super smart, and they're going to come up with a list of 10 things on why, you know, this isn't going to work, right? This is true, right? Okay, that's a problem. That's a problem. So we got to get past that, right? And sort of kind of take a leap on the magic that could be, right? Not the disruption, but on the magic that can be. The VC community there is also pretty tough. It seems like there's a lack of willingness to back small startups. So you need that kind of seed funding thing, which here is kind of actually fed mostly by ex-entrepreneurs. So that, again, that ecosystem is kind of running. So if you could get something like that, maybe even government-backed, sure, you're going to waste a lot of money, but you need something like that. Companies in Europe, boy, they have a really hard time getting that first pre-A round, really hard time. They're mostly coming here to raise that money. And if you have to do that, that's fine too. The other thing you could do is a lot of really successful Danes that have come to the Bay Area, and they build, you know, great companies, and then maybe go back and then try to work on your ecosystem there. But I mean, Denmark's got every advantage in the world. So there's a couple of tweaks. You know, Silicon Valley is like a fine souffle. It's like we got a little bit of hippies, we got the money people in Sand Hill Road. You know, it's very delicate, right? Things could go wrong in a million different ways. So, anyway.
I think somebody here in the back. No? All right.
Hi there. Name's Jason. I'm from DTU in Denmark, but not Danish. Well, almost. So I have a question. You touched on a couple of things about opportunities and to do with the creation of content and funding content. And there are two sides to this that I'm particularly interested in. Those are advertising, programmatic advertising, and the removal of tech tax, and the possibilities to do that with blockchain, and also funding of content through paying for funding newsrooms. There was an initiative, I think last year, called Civil, a coin that was being issued, and this was to fund content creation from newsrooms. And they're now, I think, approved with 50 different newsrooms. There was a guide produced on how to fund this, or how to buy the coin, that was 37 steps. And it illustrated to me how, and it failed. They didn't get the funding they needed to launch the coin, but it illustrated to me the fact that this is still so abstract that for many it's not market ready, as you said as well, because we're still needing to build this infrastructure. So my question is regarding this question of content and using blockchain as a force for liberating or keeping societies filled with good independent content, news, local news especially. What is the roadmap? How long is it going to take for this to become really accessible for people and usable?
Yeah, and I think that message, the model that you mentioned, I mean, it was innovative, hats off to the people for trying something, but I think it was a little bit too dependent on the ICO craze, which obviously kind of flamed out, right? It didn't seem like it was much more than that. Whereas I think web monetization, I think that is a long-term trend. So web monetization just simply means once you get this internet of value, so again, things like ILP are being used there, and that you then have this kind of a more open system where content creators can go online and they can fund their models through web monetization. And we don't know how that's going to quite play out yet. Could be I still have hope for Google, okay? I don't have any hope for Facebook, but I do have hope for Google because they do spawn a lot of weird stuff, and they've actually poked around with web monetization, even though it's an affront to their ad model. But I don't know, still the founders of that company, they show up at Burning Man, they do all kinds of cool stuff, so still have hope for those guys. But so that could spawn it. Apple could spawn it too with their movement into sort of privacy above all. They're not an ad model. They don't have a dog in the hunt there. So you could see some of the big models, if they embrace it, it's a huge shot in the arm for web monetization. It could all just happen organically as well. There's a neat kind of competitor to YouTube, full disclosure, I'm an investor in, called Cinnamon, which is just that. It's a YouTube using web monetization tools. And it's getting some traction. It's getting some support in the Hollywood community. That's interesting. So I think keep an eye on that for sure. Puma browser is another one. Brave browser, obviously. But all the ingredients are there, but it's going to have to happen. It can't happen through gimmicks like ICOs. But web monetization is here. It works, and it's ready to go. And I think there's a lot of people, particularly in the content creator community, that are really working hard to push this because they know where we have gone with these ad networks is a pretty broken world and kind of unacceptable. So I'll definitely keep an eye on that one. I hope that answers your question.
Anders from DTU. I have two questions actually. The first one is, how do you ideally see an environment for innovation? What is your ideal environment, and can you elaborate why? And second question is, how can you set that the environment in San Bay Area is going to march forward? Can you elaborate on how you're going to ensure it's going to keep marching forward? Because you're on a peak, maybe some say, and some say, you said, it'll keep marching. Can you elaborate on how and you ensure that?
So on the comments on kind of the innovation economy, well, I think it's encouraging students. So, I mean, it really starts at universities. I mean, I probably wouldn't have started my first company if it wasn't for one professor saying one sentence, kind of one, and it was the cut the lifeboats comment, right? And that we have Stanford Business School at the time. And, he was kind of remarking on how risk averse the graduates were. I was like, why are we risk averse? You're coming out of this great university, you have every opportunity, and everybody was just, kind of going after investment banking job back at the time and consulting jobs, at the time. So kind of just one person saying one thing at the right time can change everything. So that starts with, I think, universities, schools. You can start pretty early too. It could be high schools and even elementary schools. But just kind of getting that into your conversation and getting that into the DNA. And then, really it has to be a community that supports crazy ideas. So again, the Bay Area is famous for that. For better or for worse. We do stupid things all the time, but, would Steve Jobs have been able to start a business somewhere else? I don't know. So I think that's important. And then just the Bay Area, it's pretty, I think, widely held now that this place is just accelerating. Have you really talked to the Mark Andreessens of the world? He's the one who, I was at a presentation recently, and he, somebody asked him that question, and he said, yeah, if I'm away from the Bay Area for 6 months, I would be so out of the loop. So there's something going on. I'm not trying to brag about the area, but there's something, this critical mass that it feels pretty more sustainable than I've ever seen it. there have been a lot of worries over the years of, too dependent on chips and too dependent on this thing or that. First .com crashed, we were pretty dependent in one area. It's really not like that anymore. It's really diverse, and it's really it's a big community.